What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, back with another Outriders WorldSlayer video to bring to you, and today we are going to be covering the first ever build for WorldSlayer, and this is going to be with the Techmonger set, and we're going to be making a Techmonger Shaman build. Now, why I think this is probably the best build to actually go straight into WorldSlayer with is because it's genuinely disgusting in terms of the amount of damage, and while it does actually need a little bit of min-maxing to be able to get the full kind of like best damage numbers and like survivability out of this build, it's fairly easy to be able to actually put together. And what we'll do is that, because obviously the Apocalypse mod will always be random for everyone that actually does get a drop, I'm going to go over what are the key mods that we're actually going to be looking out for and what actually do make a difference when it comes to this build, and then from there you'll be able to actually go, these are the mods that I'm looking for, but these are the ones that are actually kind of nice to be able to have. Before we go any further into the build, make sure you have dropped a like and a subscribe. It really does help the channel out, and let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing to do is obviously have a check of the stats. Now, as you can see, we've got a bunch of legendary and apocalypse items up here, and the stats are fairly inflated. But just keep in mind that obviously I am like an average of 61 out of 62, so this is not the maximum of my build is not the maximum level to be able to achieve this apocalypse tier, which means that it makes it even more impressive for obviously the numbers and how easy it is to be able to deal with the content when I'm not even the same level as I should be. So the main thing that we actually do need to cover is going to be the main weapon. So the main weapon I always go for is the Mythos. Now the Mythos is obviously, we've done a gun guide on this already, but it's going to be one of your main guns to be able to go for, and this is twofold really, because the first one we actually want is the tier 3 mod, which is going to be Omen, where shots launch a cover piercing anomaly projectile, they inflict bleed and almost 1.3 million points of damage, and then applies a status that increases damage received by 30% for 3 seconds on a 4-second cooldown. Obviously, this is going to be the main reason, the main debuff that's obviously going to be able to help this build. And obviously, we do stack a few like damage multipliers and all that to be able to obviously get the numbers that we actually do get. The main thing that I also like to get here is Mage's Rage. I've been experimenting with this a little bit, and it does actually seem to give me a massive boost. And I do recommend that you actually use this for the time being if you can get hold of it. But otherwise, Omen will be the main thing that actually does carry you through. And you can go for other kind of like damage dealing kind of weapon mods. So things like Storm Whip or things like Claymore, etc, etc, anything that you've got that actually does a decent amount of damage. Even though this is only an LMG and it's not a shotgun, it will actually still be able to carry you through because Omen is just that good. So Mage's Rage will actually increase our anomaly power by even more, and obviously that's something you can get from the Penance, which is a double gun that we've already seen the look of, but we haven't done the gun guide on just yet, so obviously just keep an eye out for when that gun guide does actually go live. Now the Apocalypse mod that does go on this is not really helping me out, which is Judgment Enforcer, so I would actually look to be able to get another kind of like damage increasing mod. I would probably have to go for Firestorm. I think Firestorm's probably going to be the best one to actually go for, just because it actually really helps out with those kind of bossing situations, and obviously being able to deal a load of damage in a single area over and over again for 8 seconds, and I do think that's probably one of the better ones to actually go for when it comes to that. The other reason why we actually go for the Mythos, and this is why it actually works so well, is because it has Armor Pierce. Now we're going to get into that in a second, because I think this is the main thing that really makes or breaks this build, and what allowed me to be able to see my damage shoot up from something like 8 million points per damage, all the way up to around about 14 million. So obviously we'll cover that in a second, because it's going to be an armor mod that we're going to be looking at in a second. So that is the weapon, that is the main thing that you actually want to be able to look out for. I have had a bit of success with the Emerald Chaos, and obviously I've put Omen on there, but the Noxious Spawns and the Slashing Twister were there to be able to help deal with some mob enemies, and they do actually a decent amount of damage as well. I do recommend Noxious Spawns especially. I do think that one's actually a really nice one to actually be on the lookout for, just because it actually does do some homing in, and it is able to take out enemies quite efficiently. So the first thing we actually do need to cover is, when it comes to the armor, is the fact that we've got the armor set bonus. Now, we haven't seen this before, so this is going to be brand new to pretty much to everyone that's actually going. So when it comes to the Techmongers, it's very simple. Using turret skills increases your turret damage by 10%. This bonus lasts for 10 seconds and stacks up to 5 times. So all of a sudden, we can be dealing 50% extra damage when it comes to our turrets, as long as we consistently keep chucking them out. Now, it does come with some really good mods to be able to actually assist us in obviously having more turrets to be able to chuck out, and actually having them back a little bit more consistently, because it actually does spec into cooldown reduction. So the main thing we actually do need with this build, and this is why it is the perfect god tier roll, is because it does roll with anomaly power, cooldown reduction, and status power. Status power is going to help us quite nicely, and it allows us to be able to actually use our cold snap as a way of like AoE, massive AoE kind of like clearing, because it actually applies so many statuses, and then they just tick for a bunch of damage. Now, the mods that we've got on here are to be able to emphasize on our cryo turrets. Our cryo turrets are going to be our main damage dealer, and that's why we want to actually spec into those as much as possible, and we get some great tier 3 mods to be able to actually help us out with that. So the one that actually comes intrinsically on the Techmonger's mask, which I recommend you keep hold of, is Double Trouble, where you deploy an enhanced turret with 2 barrels instead of 1, and this allows you to double the fire output on that turret. Now, when it came to cryo turret in vanilla Outriders, it was kind of decent, but it was mainly used for actually just being able to apply a status, and that allowed you to be able to actually use some of like the modifiers for like freeze, and also to be able to go for the middle tree. And that was the main kind of use for it. Now we can actually turn it into a damage dealer, and this is what makes it so good. We now have the tier 3 mod of Twins, which obviously was in Vanilla Outriders when we actually had the Crown of Borealis. So 2 turrets can be placed before triggering a cooldown. So this doubles not only our fire output, it also doubles on how many turrets we can actually have out. And all of a sudden we've gone from a base cryo turret of just a single barrel into 4 barrels just from that. This one does come with crit stack, and this actually does pair really nicely with Mage's range, because obviously we're aiming for those crits to be able to actually get our 10% stacks of our anomaly power, and that means that we can actually build up some more anomaly power on top of that to be able to actually get the benefit from it as well. So while I don't think crit stack is going to necessarily be the main way to be actually be like one of the best roles when it comes to this build, I do think it's kind of nice on this, so I actually do appreciate this this Apocalypse roll that I did get. Now, just keep in mind that, like I said, we actually have to cover what is necessary and what is nice. Therefore, the Double Trouble and Twins are going to be necessary mods. I do think that these ones are just so good on their own that you kind of need this to be able to make this build really work. Moving from here, we go to the chest, and this obviously goes in anomaly power, cooldown reduction, status power again, and what we wanted to do here is be able to grab some really nice kind of like modifiers to be able to actually increase our damage a little bit further. So we've gone for a Euthanizer because the main thing we will actually be doing is Toxic, and we'll get into that in a very short while because we will be covering the class tree and as well as the Pax tree as well. We've also gone for increased damage to be able to increase the damage every single shot of our cryo turret by 38,273. This is kind of nice. It's not one of the main damage dealers, but it actually does kind of pair really nicely with our Pax tree, and that allows us to be able to actually deal quite a bit of damage, and I do recommend that you actually do pick this up where you can. We've also got Captain Hunter to increase our damage against elites by 25%, which really helps us to be able to do those bosses that you've actually seen some of the clips for already. So I recommend that you do actually get all 3 of these. I do think this is kind of necessary. If you were to drop one of them, then maybe it will be the increased damage, but I do think that Euthanizer and Captain Hunter and increased damage are pretty necessary, but I would probably leave out the increased damage if need be. The next piece that we have is the leg armor. So this is anomaly power, cooldown reduction, status power. Once again, it's brilliant. And this comes with a tier 3 mod of improved coolant, which doubles the fire rate of the deployed turret for our cryo turret, which means that we're now firing even faster. And this just gets insane when obviously we've got everything paired here. So obviously we've got 2 turrets. Each turret has got 2 barrels now, increasing their fire output, and then on top of that we've doubled the fire rate of each of those barrels, which means that one single cryo turret compared to what we used to have is now we're now able to do the same kind of amount of damage and status and spreading around as if we had 8 cryo turrets on the field, and that is just insane. And this is where the majority of the damage will actually come in, and this is why it's able to melt so quickly. So I 100% recommend that you get all these tier 3 mods for the cryo turret, and improved coolant is definitely one of them. The next interesting mod that we've gone for is Frostbite, where Cold Snap, when enemies are frozen by this skill, enemies have reduced resistance by 40% for the duration of this status. So the idea is that we kind of pair status power with Cold Snap to be able to increase the duration of freeze, and when that's actually done, it means that we're actually reducing every single enemy's resistance by 40%, which is pretty huge, and allows us to be able to actually use our skills to be able to pierce through and do as much damage as possible. So therefore, I do actually think this is kind of a necessary thing, and this is one of the main contributing reasons as to why the damage does actually boot up all the way that it does. So therefore I do recommend that you actually have both of these. These are both necessary. Now the Apocalypse mod that it came on this was Rejuvenation, which is kind of nice. It's not a bad shout, but I do think that if you get this as an Apocalypse mod, then maybe it's okay, but if you're looking to be able to put it into the build, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as well. So this is kind of on the nice side of things, but the other two are definitely going to be on the necessary side of things. Next up we have the gloves, and what this actually gives us, so I've got for a purple to be able to give me anomaly power and status. I preferably would have liked a cooldown reduction in there, but to be able to get all these rolls in one in such a short amount of time, it just wasn't going to happen, so that's something I'm going to keep an eye out for in the first place. Now we've gone for Long Winter, and we've got Shatter. Long Winter increases the radius of the skill for Cold Snap by 66%, and our Shatter allows us to be able to deal 25% more damage against enemies afflicted by freeze. Obviously, when it comes to freeze, because we are using cryo turrets, everything's going to get frozen. We're using Cold Snap, everything's going to get frozen. So therefore, it makes sense that we actually do put Shatter into this build. When it came to Long Winter, though, this is kind of one that was subjective. I would probably recommend swapping this out, but in the same respect, I've actually loved having this mod in on my class, and the reason why is because Cold Snap with the use of the Pax tree actually turns into a very deadly skill and allows you to be able to take out mobs of enemies with just one activation of the skill and just leaving them to be able to die. The fact that we've got so much status power means that we can actually apply so many statuses just from the use of Cold Snap, and maybe an Omen in there as well, and that allows us to be able to actually let them bleed out, or Toxic or Freeze will actually finish them off, or any kind of other status that it actually does get to apply. So therefore, I do think that Long Winter is nice. It's bordering on the necessary side of things, but if I was to take something out of this build, it would be Long Winter. And we did get Radical Therapy as well to be able to increase our damage to our toxic enemies by 15% as well. Once again, that's going to be a necessary one because we want all those damage multipliers as much as possible. And then lastly, we've got the boots, and obviously we would be preferably looking for something along the purple lines to be able to actually get a anomaly power, increase it even further, status power, and some cooldown reduction. So the boots themselves are not necessarily a good roll, and I did get rid of the tier 3 mod on this to be able to grab no resistance against the fortified. I'll come back to that in a second. So we've got Hail Shot, so the cryo turret will increase the turret's damage based on our status power, and obviously pretty much every single item apart from the boot is actually spec'd into status power, and obviously that allows us to be able to actually increase our damage by a decent amount. If I look at our status power when it comes to this, we are at 294.9%, which means that we're boosting our damage to our cryo turret by the same amount as well. I do have the Apocalypse mod of Enriched Anthrax, and while that is actually quite nice to be able to actually go for the Blighted Turret, the Blighted Turret actually isn't one of our main damage dealers, so therefore I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. I would probably say this is in the nice category again, and it's definitely not recommended to actually have. No resistance against the Fortified, on the other hand, is where this kind of pairs up with the Mythos, because the no resistance against the Fortified had a buff. So it used to be a case that it was 50% of our armor piercing value went into our resistance pierce, and that means that we can actually now, instead of it just being a 15% increase, we now get a flat 30% due to obviously our gun, because we've constantly got the Mythos out, and that gives us a 30% armor pierce. So that means we're now stacking our resistance pierce even higher, and allows us to be able to actually do even more damage. Now, the one mod that I don't have on this just yet, and that's because of my Apocalypse rolls, and I will be looking out to be able to get something like this, will be Unstoppable Force. Now, if I can get Unstoppable Force, that will actually boost this anomaly power even higher, because our resistance pierce is currently at 55%. If I can get a 27.5% boost to my anomaly power, I am going to be laughing, and I genuinely think that's going to be one of the best mods to actually go for, so definitely keep your eye out for a piece that actually does roll with that. Just to quickly touch on the skills, which I'm sure you've been able to piece together just from obviously the build that we're actually doing. And this is Blighted Turret, Cold Snap, and Cryo Turret. Fairly simple. Let's just move on. And then this goes to our class tree. Now, our class tree is kind of unique in a way, because obviously we want to be able to actually increase our anomaly power as much as possible, as well as increase our resistance piercing wherever possible, and then be able to actually go into freeze and obviously go into the shaman tree. So we've picked up things to be able to increase our anomaly power as much as possible. I would have loved to have gone a little bit further here to be able to actually grab the resistance piercing, but there's just not enough. We did actually grab one of these capstones here, which is Adrenalizing Antenna, where using our Blighted Turret actually increases our anomaly power for ourselves and our allies by 30% for 10 seconds, and this actually helps to be able to start stacking ourselves up and to be able to get ourselves into a snowball kind of state to be able to increase the amount of damage we're doing. Going for Wipeout actually is a great perk to be able to pick up with this, and this allows us to be able to actually finish off most of the elites as quickly as we actually do, and this works for all of our weapons as well as our turrets as well, so that is very nice in the first place. We grabbed we grabbed a couple of health nodes obviously, and we've grabbed a cooldown reduction to actually help us out with our middle tree kind of skills, and then we've grabbed our Exposing Frost because we are planning to do Frost as much as possible, which means that we're actually employing Vulnerable and we're making it even more deadly and more effective, and that allows us to be able to get some nice damage numbers as well. We've allowed to be able to increase our freeze as much as possible. We've grabbed a little bit of weapon leech and increased our armor and a bit more damage to freeze. And then we've got our overclocked, which makes us nigh on unkillable because every single time we activate either our cold snap or our cryo turrets, that allows us to be able to increase our anomaly power or our weapon damage by 40% for 10 seconds, and it also gives us a really nice revive mechanic, and this is what helps us to be able to keep in the fight and what makes trials so easy. If we quickly look at our Ascension, because obviously this should be fairly easy, the main thing you want to be able to do is go into Anomaly. Now, I would recommend that your first 10 points go straight into Anomaly damage, because that is obviously going to be one of the main reasons to be able to actually boost up most of the damage that your build actually does. I would then go into potentially Resistance Pierce, and then I think I went into Damage Against Elite, and then I went into Anomaly Power, because I think this gives us the least amount of boost compared to everything else. So therefore, I do think that it's probably the best way to go. And then next, I will probably either go into Status Power, possibly Armor Pierce, or possibly Cooldown Reduction. I think Armor Pierce will help us because it will give us an additional 5% into our Resistance Pierce, which is kind of on it will give us another 10% on our Resistance Pierce, which is quite nice, and that will actually help us out. So I probably actually am going to go for that one next. When it comes to our Pax tree, we've gone for our top tree to be able to actually take into consideration the dissection tree, and that just allows us to be able to boost our damage as stupidly as possible. So you want to go for Initial Striker to increase our anomaly power by 15% for 5 seconds every single time we activate a skill. Our Lethal Devices is our main damage dealer because every single time we use a gadget skill, which is going to be our cryo turret or our cold snap, it will allow us to inflict toxic to enemies and then deal an additional 10% of our anomaly power as damage if toxic was refreshed. So obviously this is where the cryo turret actually gets the main boost of its damage because obviously it's coming straight from our anomaly power. Painkiller is very nice in this build because what this allows you to do is actually use Cold Snap as a way to be able to heal yourself, and all you need to do is actually just drop it, and because of the plus 66% range, it will pretty much hit anything that's on the map in a way, and what that does is as long as you hit 2 enemies, you're now getting 10% health regen, which allows you to be able to stay in the fight. So it's a really nice panic button, as well as obviously to be able to keep you in the fight, and obviously this triggers off your turrets as well, and obviously your intrinsic healing. You're basically never really going to die, and it's, to be completely honest with you, I think there's only ever been once that I've ever triggered the revive, so obviously that's something to be able to pay attention to. Lastly, we've got the permanence, which allows us to be able to inflict toxic on an enemy, and this 100% chance to inflict a random additional status every single time we do that, and obviously this pairs really nicely when it comes to our lethal devices. And then lastly, dissection, where we deal 10% more damage to enemies for every single status afflicted on them. Obviously this mainly comes into it when it comes to elites, because that means we're actually hitting elites so many times, and that allows us to be able to stack up so many different statuses, and obviously then every single time we get an additional 10% every single time a new status goes on them. So it snowballs. The more the cryo turrets actually hit, the faster they hit an enemy, the more chance they're actually going to start ranking up into dissection in the first place. So there you have it. That is everything to do with the Techmonger Tech Shaman build that I've currently got for you. Probably the easiest, the best way to actually go through all of Trials, and probably the safest way to do any kind of endgame content. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. I am looking to be able to actually get this into my first min-max, and this will be the main build that will take me all the way to Apocalypse Tier 40. If I find any changes to this build, I will happily drop a pinned comment in the comment section down below, unless it's a case that I've had to redo most of the build, in which case I will actually do a separate video. But overall, I cannot see this having any issues tackling any content whatsoever in any of the Outriders, whether it be WorldSlayer or whether it be in the vanilla game. So I highly recommend that you go out there and you actually start building this, and then just have a lot of fun and a blast with this. That just leaves me to say thank you so much for making your way to the end of the video. Thank you so much to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. And obviously, we will be bringing a lot more of WorldSlayer content your way, whether it be builds, whether it be weapon guides, whether it be any kind of like hints and tips. Thank you all so much. As always, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.